Hello and welcome to this video. Thank you so much for joining me. This video is actually a follow-up and a wrap-up to a video I did last year in October 2020 called Consumer Igniter Failures, a Closer Look. In that video I tested two igniters which were consumer focused. One was a Talon clip-on igniter. These are designed to be clipped over the safety visco fuse of a consumer firework, and they use a heated coil to ignite the fuse. The other was a consumer Ematch. This is an Ematch but with a special shroud on the end designed to easily thread your visco fuse in and out of. Talon igniters are like Marmite on my forum. Some of you have used them extensively and had no problems at all. Others have experienced failures. Conversely, those of you that use Ematches seem to report very little in the way of problems. So my expectations coming into this test was that with the Talon clips, if I used enough of them, I'd see a failure rate of something there. But with the consumer Ematches, because they're based on an Ematch, hopefully all of those should have worked fine. Surprisingly then, I had a 100% success rate with Talons, but significant failures with consumer Ematches. This failure rate increased quite a lot when I switched from the thick visco fuse that I was testing with initially to the thinner visco fuse taken off actual fireworks that I liberated from a cheap selection box. It seemed to be that the thinner the fuse, the more the flame was dispersed around it and couldn't quite ignite the fuse reliably. This led to some interesting suggestions from forum members. Someone said that I should stick the fuse down the shroud so that it connects with the Ematch head. But that isn't how these are supposed to be used. The whole point of these with the shroud with the bit at the end is to feed your visco in and out of that. Someone else said you should cut the fuse to expose black powder and put it down the shroud so that it's snug against the igniter. Those forum members obviously didn't watch the video all the way through, because if you do watch it, you'll see at the end I got increasingly desperate trying to get these to work. I was cutting the fuse lengthways to expose lots of black powder, putting this down the shroud so it's connecting with the igniter, and then taping it all up to enclose the whole explosion in one place to try and keep the heat there. But I still had failures. As I think I said in that video, I really can't understand how some of these pieces of visco didn't ignite, considering all the lengths I went to try and get them to go off. And to rule out the visco as being faulty, I did, after those failures, then use Talons on the same pieces of fuse, and they all ignited okay. I promised after that video that I would be back with more testing, and that's what I've done this morning. In fact, I've had a few hunches to try out, and I think I've come to a conclusion of sorts. So the first part of the jigsaw to fall in place actually occurred this summer. I switched over to using standard Ematches to test out some firing systems. Also, I noticed that when I do a range test, if I use an Ematch rather than a clip-on igniter, I can hear it pop when I press the button on the remote control. That's a much easier way of hearing whether something that's not in line of sight has gone off. But when I fired multiple Ematches at the same time, I jumped out of my skin, and in one of my videos I even apologise for the camera shake because I wasn't expecting it to sound quite so loud. But why am I jumpy this year, whereas last year, using consumer Ematches, that's an Ematch just with a different shroud on, I didn't have any jumping around at all. They weren't that loud. So that got me wondering whether there is actually a difference between the two types of igniter. The next part of the jigsaw to fall into place occurred when I did the photos for these enamel pin badges, which are still available in the online shop if you would like to buy one, link below. I wanted to have a Lego welder surrounded by lots of sparks, so to initiate this sequence I used an Ematch connected to a small firing system. Based on using consumer Ematches the year before without their shroud on, just to see what they did, I was expecting quite a small flame. But what actually happened was the Ematches, the standard Ematches, went off so violently that the flame was 2 or 3 times higher than the Lego figures in some cases. And I was quite surprised by this, so this led me to conclude again that perhaps standard Ematches are not the same as consumer Ematches. So this warranted a closer look, and that's what I've been doing out in the garden this morning. Before I play this first bit of video, just to recap then what my theory is, I believe that the Ematch igniter head inside a consumer Ematch, that's the one with the special shroud for the visco, is not as powerful as the igniter head inside a standard Ematch, the one that doesn't come with the visco shroud. This would account for the failures that I've had with my consumer ematches, and also would explain why those of you in the forum who use standard ematches are scratching your heads wondering what the problem is. So take a look at this setup here. What we have here then are 4 igniters, 2 of each type. I'm going to alternate them, starting off with a consumer ematch igniter, followed by a standard ematch, then a consumer ematch, then a standard ematch. Alternating between the two will help us see if there's any difference. So let's take a look at that now. Could you see a difference there? The difference in real life when I was standing there was quite obvious. I hope it comes across on video, but let me just play that again. These standard ematches were, to my eyes, definitely more powerful than the consumer ematches. They flare up a bit more, give off a bit more smoke and heat as well. Let's try another 4 to see what result we get there. Again, I hope you'll agree there that the standard ematches do flare up more than the consumer ematches, and I'm going to do another 4 now, so this is 12 in total, 6 of each type. Let's see how these went. I note as well that very occasionally with one of the consumer ematches, when it goes off, it's just a very small flame. This would account for last year during my testing with these. Some of them would flare up and the visco would ignite. Some of them would just give off a very small fut, as if they weren't really doing much inside the shroud. Let's now take a look at a close-up photo. This photo then shows a standard ematch igniter head compared to a consumer ematch igniter head. You can see there is a difference there. The standard ematch looks slightly bigger, slightly more bulbous, so there is a little bit more composition on there. Just referring to my notes now, my theory, which I hope you agree is backed up by the video and those photos, is that the igniter head in the consumer ematches is weaker, considerably so in some cases, than the igniter heads in standard ematches. The end result of this, if you watch my video from last October, is significant failure rates trying to light visco, which is the sole purpose of this type of igniter. Whether this is down to just a faulty batch that I've got, a faulty batch in general, or this is actually the specification of these igniters, I can't tell you. But what I can tell you is that I will not be using consumer ematches again to light visco. My advice is to use either Talon clip-on igniters, I've had great success with those, or standard ematches. I run some tests on those this morning. That will be my next video, so please stay tuned for that. If you have got some consumer ematches and you do intend to press on and use them, please do watch my previous video on this, because I go to various different lengths to try and get a higher success rate. So you might get some tips from that video to help you avoid any failures. Well, I hope you found this video useful. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.